the second episode of the PGH Sports Castle Podcast. I'm Rachael Kriger. I'm your host. And last week, we had our first show, and it was all about let's not mess up and let's do this and try to get a good episode out of it. So, totally forgot at the end to give a shout out to our frontline workers, all of our healthcare workers and whatnot, doing all that they can during this crazy coronavirus pandemic. So wanted to give a shout out to them first and foremost because they are really working their butts off and doing everything that they can. I am not alone tonight. I have two very great writers for the site. I have two very good friends of mine. We have Shalene Hixon and Antonio Wolfe. No crazy last names to pronounce this time, and that's a total pick on for Cody. But how are you guys doing?
Doing pretty good.
Doing about as good as I can. Stuck at home, but yeah, doing well. Can't complain relative to how other people are doing. So I consider myself pretty lucky.
Yeah, for sure. I know one thing, I'm so happy I live with my parents because I would lose my mind if I lived at home. That would just drive me nuts. What are some things you guys are doing to, kind of combat boredom?
Sure. So I actually just started the Michael Jordan documentary, watched the first episode. It's already in the first episode, I'm already seeing things I didn't know. In addition to that, just a whole bunch of TV, whole bunch of movies. I'm actually in the financial industry, so I have kept my day job, and I've been working from home most days, going in about once a week downtown, where you could pretty much lay in the street for a couple minutes and not get hit by a car. That's how much of a ghost town it is down there. So it's been interesting. But, yeah, just trying to keep my mind out of the news, except for sports. But, yeah, a lot of TV, a lot of movies.
Shalene, what are you doing to keep not bored?
Well, since I get bored easily, I try to just find random things around the house to do. So that basically has included trying to work out a little more because I figured I'm at home a lot now. I might as well do something instead of just sitting at home all day on the couch. I've been trying to read a few books. They're the Star Wars books, so don't judge me. I know. Star Wars.
It was your holiday yesterday, so...
Yeah, so it was my favorite national holiday, Star Wars Day. Other than that, just been playing a bunch of video games, watching some movies, hanging out with my friends online. That's, it's basically what I've been doing.
I gotta tell you, Antonio, I've been watching The Last Dance too, and I've been super behind, and I finally got caught up to this weekend's episodes. And just wait until you see Kobe again. That's all I gotta say.
Oh, absolutely.
It's gonna be rough. But we are here to. I brought these two along because I'm going to be straight up with our listeners. I am not an expert on baseball at all. Shalene knows that I go to baseball games and I start yelling about soccer and start yelling soccer terms because that's just who I am, and people look at me like I'm nuts. But I brought these two along because they know baseball. Antonio does awesome work for us covering the Pirates. He always has some really kind of quirky and fun content ideas, which are really cool. And Shalene, she kind of dips her toes in Pirates and with the Penguins too, and with the Steelers as well. So that's exciting. But we had some news coming from baseball the last couple of weeks, and there is the potential idea of a realigning conferences so we could get back into live sports and having baseball in June, which we'll touch on that later. But I'm not going to go over every conference, but just kind of a newser, if you will, is they are, trying to align these. I almost said defend. Align these into three different conferences, and the Pittsburgh Pirates would be in the East Conference with the Baltimore Orioles, Boston Red Sox, Miami Marlins, New York Mets, New York Yankees, Philadelphia Phillies, Tampa Bay Rays, Toronto Blue Jays, and the Washington Nationals. Guys, do me a favor, make sense of this for me and to all the other people who are scratching their heads and saying, why? And frankly, WTF?
Sure. Shalene, I think based on the pre-show, you'll have some thoughts that I'd actually like to play some devil's advocate too. So if you want to start and take it from there to start.
Yeah, when I first saw it, Obviously, it looks like they want to try and keep it as regionally close as they can get, because obviously all the teams are on the eastern side of the country, and then you got Toronto. But I will admit, when I first saw it, I'm like, this is not going to be very good if you're a Pirates fan, because just looking at this alignment, the only three other teams that were as bad, if not worse than the Pirates last year, were the Orioles, the Marlins, and the Rays. So we would basically probably be the bottom four in this alignment, because this probably would have been like a Pirates fan's worst nightmare, seeing the Mets, the Yankees, the Phillies, Blue Jays, Nationals, and just keep going on. And it's just like, it's going to be really interesting to see if this plays out this way, because, yeah, I don't have a lot of hope if that's actually how this is going to happen. It might be a little tough season for us this year.
Sure, and I definitely agree with what you're saying is where it will be tough. You pointed out some of the teams that are certainly going to be difficult with the Yankees, Mets, Nationals, even the Phillies with their signings a couple off seasons ago, the Rays. Just an absolute murderer's row of a division, if that's what they're calling it. However, where I'm going to play devil's advocate is not so much disagreeing with what you said, but I think if there's ever a year where this is good for the Pirates, it's this year. And this is why. I think no matter who the Pirates were going to play this year, it was going to be a tough test. They are not a good baseball team. They have a pitching staff returning everyone except Jamison Tyone. And it was a bad staff to begin with, and now you're not returning your ace. And whoever we were coming back with, it wasn't going to be good. So we were going to be playing the Cubs, Cardinals, Reds, and Brewers, four teams I would also put on murderer's row. So if there was ever a year where we were going to lose regardless, it may have been this year. I hate to cancel a season before it even starts, but if we were going to, I think let's see some games against other teams rather than 17 games each against the Cardinals, Cubs, Brewers, Reds, which we get to see every year. I was excited to see the Yankees and Red Sox before this new transitional schedule came out. Now I'm circling the Phillies, interstate rival. I'm circling the Orioles, who were a rival back in the 70s and 80s. I'm circling the Rays, who had a bounce-back season last year. And I'm circling the Nationals, who are, of course, the defending champs. So where I agree that it's going to be extremely tough to play against, I'm kind of excited that I get to see different teams in a year where I wasn't really expecting a good Pirates team.
Is this something that you guys could potentially see? All of the stuff with COVID-19 is changing everything as we know it, of course. And is this something that you think the MLB could look at and say, hey, we have to change it because of travel and whatnot. We don't want, Pittsburgh flying out to Milwaukee because it's easier to get to Philadelphia and whatnot. Is this something that the MLB could look at and be like, hey, this is a test. We don't like it. Let's scrap it in 2021. Or do you think this is something that could stay?
I honestly don't really know. I feel like it might, like you said, might be based on results. If it goes well, they might at least take a look at it for future seasons. But I think everybody always wants to look forward to those other kind of matchups, like, again, with the Orioles, Nationals, all that. So they might enjoy that, and they might be like, well, if it goes well, we might be able to keep it, but they might just go back to their old ways after a while. But with COVID-19, it's going to be really hard to tell, because especially with travel and going to these big cities, it's honestly going to be just a toss-up, really, because anything this virus has taught us is that you really cannot put anything set in stone. So I honestly don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's up in the air, and where there's a lot of teams I'd love to see every year on that. And we were rivals with Cincinnati. We were rivals with the Cubs. We were rivals with these teams, and we were good. Now that we've had some years where we're not, it almost feels like they're not even rivals anymore. The only other team I'd like to see in our division is Cleveland. I think that'd be a very cool rivalry to get back into baseball. Obviously, with them in the American League, there's really not much there. But what I really like about these divisions is you keep you keep all the current rivalries and you add a couple. So you're keeping the Yankees, Red Sox. You're keeping Chicago, St. Louis, Milwaukee, who are all up there in that same area. But you're also adding Mets, Yankees in the same division, which is very cool. You're adding both Chicago teams in the same division, which is very cool. These divisions make more sense than the current ones, but I think they've seen a lot of good results as far as revenue and excitement with what it was in 2019. They won't permanently go to it. But I definitely wish they would. I think the only team that really got kind of screwed up in all of this is the Atlanta Braves. They're in that Central Division, which, if you're looking at a globe, makes sense because they're more west than, say, a Pittsburgh. But I think they're going to have the most travel. I mean, most of the teams in that Central Division are up there. Detroit, St. Louis, Chicago, they're up north, and they're not going to play the teams like Miami, Washington, some of the teams on the eastern side. So I think if anyone lost in this, it was the Atlanta Braves.
Well, sure. And I mean, you look at a map and you see that, Tampa Bay's in the same division as Pittsburgh. And it's like, it would make sense in a way to have more than just 3 conferences because, Pittsburgh and Tampa Bay is not very, that's not easy. That's a 18, 19-hour drive, if not, 2-hour flight, whatnot. So I think when I first looked at these conferences, I thought, where's Cleveland? Where's Cincinnati? If we're doing this based on travel, why are we going down instead of across, if that makes sense? I mean, it kind of blew my mind to not see Cleveland because that's only 2 hours away from Pittsburgh. It's an easy drive. It's not hard to do. Cincinnati's a 3, maybe 4-hour drive. So, looking at these conferences, it was a little mind-boggling at first. But I think the MLB is just like every other league. They're trying to figure stuff out. They're trying to squeeze what they can together to try to get something out of a season. So this is going to be a super elementary question for you guys. Is it good? Is it bad? What is this?
I think it could be good. It's just going to depend on how the season goes, but at least it makes sense in a way geographical wise, if that's the right word for it. Because again, you got all of them on the East Coast, but yeah, going literally from one end of the coast to the other is a little bit. It's a little stretching it a little bit, and I agree that they should have had Cleveland. I mean, even Cincinnati. I mean, granted, we've played them how many times, obviously, because we're in the same division with them now. But yeah, it's good, not perfect, but it definitely could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, and I'd say good in this sense. It's just a relative term. Good, I'd say it's good relative to the other things that were brought up in this offseason, some of the other alternatives that they were talking about. I would not have liked them trying to squeeze 162 games into this season. They were talking about double headers. They were talking about 7-inning games. I think those were kind of taking baseball and trying to turn them into like a old man softball league where you're playing 4 games every Sunday just because of rainouts that you had. So good relative to the other proposals, yes. Obviously, good relative to what we could have had if this didn't happen, no. But, yeah, I think for what's been such a terrible, terrible thing in this world, I'm excited. I'm excited for a proposal like this. I'm excited to see weird stuff happen, and it's not just the same divisions, the same format squeezed into 3 months. So I think as far as this proposal goes, they did a good job of putting something on the field that I would watch.
And in terms of the number of teams, obviously it is expanded. The Pirates' former division, counting them, had 5 teams. Correct me if I'm wrong. But one thing that it's something that you hear, whether it's football, it's soccer, it's baseball, it's hockey. You want to play the best teams in order to become the best team yourself. And so when you see former division rivals like the Milwaukee Brewers and the St. Louis Cardinals out of the conference and heading to potentially a new conference, what does that make you feel? And who are the teams that you could see, quote-unquote, replace them in terms of that quality? Obviously, the Yankees would probably be one of them.
Yeah, I could see a few of the teams. I think the 2 that I'd be looking out for are the Mets and Yankees. Or not even the Yankees, actually the Phillies, because I remember seeing the rivalry they kind of had last year when they came in to town in the summer, and I thought they were pretty entertaining games, honestly. And I think just in sports in general, there always is going to be that underlying, like, interstate rivalry, and, like, Pittsburgh always wants bragging rights over Philly and vice versa, so I could easily see the Phillies being one of them. And I could see the Mets, too, in a way, because they're not on par with, like, the Yankees or the Red Sox, so they're just, like, we're kind of right, I would say, below them, but they're not, like, upper echelon kind of team, not yet, anyway. But I would definitely be interested in seeing the Phillies for sure.
Yeah, definitely with the Phillies. The biggest game, or the most attended game I've been to at PNC Park in the past 2 years was when Kutch came back. And with McCutchen being with the Phillies now, that'll be a great game. I haven't looked this up, but I'm pretty sure Josh Harrison just signed there in this offseason as well. So just a couple familiar faces coming back will be cool. That will also be cool with the Rays too. You got Meadows, Glasnow, Charlie Morton. So just some really cool returners. I'm looking up now. Morton may have potential. Yeah, Morton's still with the Rays.
And you were about Harrison.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Walker's there too.
Yeah, the Phillies and the Rays have kind of become like Pittsburgh 2 and 3 in a weird way. So they took all our players that were, playoff players with us and distributed them across those two teams, and now we're nowhere to be seen in the playoffs. So they got the better end of that bargain.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, shoot, you put all of the former players from the Pirates from these two teams, really, it's two teams, and you put them up against the current Pirates now. Ooh, that's a heck of a ball game. Speaking of the Pittsburgh Pirates, obviously, we talked about the division and just MLB in general. What does this mean for the Pirates? Is this really, really bad for the Pirates, or is this maybe there is a sort of spring of hope for the Pirates that they could do something?
Oh, that's a tough one. I feel like from a good portion of the fan base's perspective, it's going to probably be bad because, like I touched on earlier, at least from what I can see and from what I've seen the last few years, the Orioles, the Marlins, and the Rays are really the only three other teams in this proposed realigned division that are as bad, if not worse than we were last year. So I guess the silver lining in that is that we wouldn't be in the complete bottom of the basement of this division. But besides that, I think with the fans, the worst part is I think they've just gotten so apathetic with the team that they're kind of just like, well, I mean, there might be some hope, but probably not. It's just that air of pessimism around the team. It's just, it's interesting, but not really surprised. But they might be able to surprise us. Who knows? We might be able to knock off like the Rays, maybe the Nationals, Mets. You never know, but I think it's going to be interesting just because you're going to get a lot of new matchups that you haven't seen in a really long time. Like Antonio touched on earlier, the Orioles, big rivalry back in the 70s, and the Mets too back in like the 90s. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, but I think leaning more towards it's not going to be a great season for the Pirates.
So yeah, I mean, I'll definitely agree. It's not going to be a great season for the Pirates, but I'll say this, there's a reason they play 162 games in the MLB, and I think we've seen with the Pirates that some of the teams that really aren't good in their first 80, 100 games can play good before the trade deadline. These past two Pirates teams in the past 2 years, which in my opinion were not good ball clubs, were competing around that 100-game line. So anything that's different than the normal 162-game format or the normal division, I think is going to be good for the Pirates. But again, using good is a relative term to what it could have been. I still think it's a bad Pirates team. I still think they will not win many games. But if there was anything that could help the Pirates, it was a very weird, shortened season where maybe the best teams that usually emerge, such as the Nationals last year, who were not a good team at the start, some of the better teams that emerge in that 162-game season, they don't have the time to do that. And the Pirates do, for some weird way, picking up weird wins here or there. And who knows? It could be good for the Pirates relative to what it could have been. But I would agree. It's probably still going to be a whole bunch of losses with a bad pitching staff. But as far as this proposal goes, I think it's good. It's more good than bad.
And I enjoy you talking about the number of games and such. Listen, 162, it's probably not going to happen. I think you're spot on, Antonio, when you say you can't have 4 games playing back to back to back to back. It just, that does more harm than good for the players, for their bodies, preventing injuries and stuff like that. And, hear me out, guys, but, not getting off topic, but talking to professional athletes this week, I've gotten to talk to a couple of the Seattle Sounders soccer team players. They said, everyone has said, listen, we want quality. We don't just want games, we want quality games. And I feel like that goes across the board for every professional athlete out there, whether it's soccer, baseball, football, whatnot. Quality is what's important. It's what fans want to watch. They don't just want to watch, I don't know what the word is, but they just don't want to watch a free-for-all and whatnot. So ideally for you guys, what is a realistic number for the MLB to say we can do this many games, not back-to-back-to-back-to-back days, but how many games can we get done in a season and make it worthwhile with keeping quality in mind?
Yeah, definitely a full season is not going to happen because I feel like to a point it might be able to work, but then just the ripple effect with seasons to come with injuries and fatigue and everything, I think it will definitely do a lot more harm than good. I don't even know, to keep the quality, I feel like you'd have to have maybe half a season almost, so maybe 80 games or so. Because if it's just going to be a shortened season, you just, like you said, you need quality, not quantity. And I think people would rather sit through a full game where there's 80 of them instead of, okay, well, I'm going to sit down at God knows how early in the afternoon and wait until God knows how late at night to watch 4 games in a row. No one is going to realistically do that. It's not going to be possible. It might be enjoyable to few for maybe a few games or so, but it would get old really quick. Because I know personally I would be bored because baseball, it's compared to I don't know, hockey or football, it's not a high energy something's happening all the time kind of sport. So you can only get so much of it at a time until it just gets a little stale or you just get bored with it. So I'd say around 80 games maybe would be a reasonable amount to just keep the quality of baseball up.
Sure, and I definitely agree. Just to recap for those who haven't seen the most recent proposal, it is the 10-team divisions, 3 of them. Teams would only play against other clubs in their division, and the current proposal has 100 regular season games with an expanded playoffs. The thing about only playing the teams in their division, of course, it's about COVID. Of course, it's about not, wanting to limit travel is their biggest concern. However, looking this up, what it does mean for the Pirates is maybe even worse than what it could have been. We were 11-21 against the NL East last year, and every team in our division would include all the teams from the East except for the Atlanta Braves. So that, at least based off of last year, isn't good for the Pirates. Interleague play, they were 12-8. So you do scattering a couple interleague games here and there. So I'm assuming 10-team divisions, 9 other than us. You got 100 games. Asking what would probably be most likely games, I don't know why they wouldn't make that 90 games with there being 9 other teams in the division. You play 10 games each. That seems more likely to me. You were also talking about how doubleheaders would get boring on TV, and I think that's a really important point because that's all they care about this season. There's not going to be fans in the seats. There's nobody going to be paying for tickets, so getting eyeballs on the TVs is everything that they're worried about for money's sake, advertisers, things like that. So keeping it exciting, keeping it high energy, and making every game matter a little more is the most important. So I agree that doubleheaders would be a really bad idea, and you could lose out on potential viewers that would lose out on potential advertising dollars.
And here's the thing, too, and I never realized this until halfway through a show. We talked about it last night on a soccer podcast I do. Everything that we're saying, it could be out the window. There could be, let's say that the Pirates go to Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a pretty hotbed area right now. Or even worse, the New Yorks are, really up in numbers with COVID-19. What if somebody from the Pirates tests positive? That just, not ruins, I wouldn't use that word, but it just kind of dismantles the whole thing, how accessible is testing going to be when it comes to stuff like this? Because you cannot have players traveling and, you're traveling by plane or by bus, and if you're traveling by plane, you're then getting on a bus, then you go to a hotel, then you go to a facility, then you get back on the bus, and then on another plane, and it's just, there's so many changing of hands, if you will, that, all of this stuff that we're talking about could very well go out the window. But keeping that negativity aside, the MLB is thinking about starting in June. Is this too early? Is it too late? What do we think about the start date, and is it plausible in your eyes? Granted, we know anything could happen with COVID-19. There are people saying a second sweep could happen, but is it plausible to do those 80, 90, 100 games, whatever it may be?
It's definitely going to be a tough call because, like you said, there are no guarantees with this virus. Like, you might think it's going to be gone in not even a few weeks, maybe by like the beginning of June, but literally maybe a week or so later, it's going to be maybe 1,000 more cases, because it's just like, it doesn't seem like there's really a pattern, because it almost seems like there's a whole bunch of cases, and then it seems like it's slowing down a little bit, but then it just shoots back up again. So I don't know if there's really a definite, like, this is exactly when we can start the season and make it, because it's just going to be hard to tell regardless, because like you were saying, you might think everything's going to be fine. What happens if one of the team members, staff, anything tests positive? It's not like the regular cold where, you start getting the symptoms and in a few days, you can just shut it down. By the time you get the symptoms, it's too late, because...
And some people are asymptomatic too.
Yeah. Yeah, and it could just spread like wildfire, and it could be, unfortunately, a really good possibility that a good portion of the team gets sick, which then just could end up transferring it to God knows how many teams. So honestly, it is just so hard to tell now, because like I said, there's no guarantees with this virus. So we might think June might be like the definite start time that they could go for, but for all we know, May 31st might come around and we might just get another massive hit in the cities that they might be playing, like Philadelphia, New York, LA, Miami, Seattle. All these big cities, if they don't see any signs of at least just slowing down at a decent rate, it might just be all for naught at that point.
Yeah, and that's what I really didn't understand with what the NBA was proposing, where teams that were low in areas that were low in cases could open their practice facilities. And not only is it odd to have a couple teams open and a couple teams closed, but it's a massive advantage to the teams that can open. I didn't really understand that as far as, competitive integrity goes. And when you do look at these divisions, I mean, it doesn't make sense having the New York Yankees and New York Mets in with the Tampa Bay Rays, because if you look at the curves of those two states, and who would have ever thought in a sports conversation we'd be saying these types of things, but if you look at the curves in these two states, they're vastly different, and they really don't make sense to be in the same divisions. If anything, I agree with what you said earlier, there should be more divisions, or it should be more regional, or honestly, it could be based on the amount of cases, because you could have some games where players are required to wear masks. You could also probably have Kansas City and Tampa Bay play a game with nothing, because their cases have been much lower than like a Philadelphia or a New York. Even Pittsburgh players traveling to Philadelphia, it's vastly different. Allegheny County is the worst in Southwest, but it's not even close to the worst in PA. So just the way they align the divisions, it really only took into consideration travel and did not take into consideration really the spread of this. I know that's a tough thing to do, but it gives some teams, I think, massive advantages, especially if, Max Scherzer gets COVID, and some of the teams in the West or the Central have their whole pitching staff. It's just a really odd thing to consider. And since we are talking too early, too late for June, I don't want to be the bad news guy, but there honestly probably shouldn't be any sports in 2020. But I don't mind them putting a June date on something, just because if you're going to go through with it, you need to start thinking about when. You can't just keep saying we'll consider the details as the time comes. Baseball is one of the only sports that depends on the weather. So you have to put a timeline on this thing. And I am worried about an expanded playoff going into November and into December, especially if some of these Northeastern teams are in it, or even like a Colorado or a Chicago or a Detroit. But yeah, I'm glad they put a date on it. Gets me excited as a fan. But if we're speaking honestly, there probably shouldn't have been sports in 2020. You're already going to have a lousy 2020. Why make it a lousy 2021 by pushing the season this far back? So.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a great point too. Going back to that quality, how much are you really going to try to squeeze out of it to get a few $100,000? You're not making millions of dollars with no fans and no concessions and no buying merch and stuff like that. You're not going to make as much money as you usually do. 2021, it could be the huge bounce back year, but in 2020, it goes to the point of what is the risk and what is the reward? Does the risk really outweigh the reward, or opposite? Does the reward outweigh the risk? But anyway, kind of going to that idea of opening things back up and keeping the integrity of competition. There are teams in the New Yorks and in the Floridas that everyone has to listen to their local government and their state government and whatnot. And they have to adhere to the guidelines, or else no bueno, bad news. So, you get a team out in like Kansas City. I know Kansas City is not a real high profile area, and they can open up. But those teams in the New Yorks, they're not going to open up. And what they're saying on Sports Illustrated is that there is kind of a want of an 18 to 21 day training camp, if you will, to kind of get these players back involved. But what if the New Yorks can't open up that whole time? That just kind of throws everything off. What are you going to have two conferences play and one just not play because of the high profile areas? There are so many questions surrounding this, and to kind of repeat your sentiments, Antonio, never ever would have thought we would have had a conversation like this around sports in our lifetimes. So, to kind of just recap that, MLB is thinking about starting in June. They're not hammering down a date yet. They're just saying, hey, this is our idea, this is our proposal, this is what we're thinking. Guys, any more thoughts on the proposal, on the conferences, anything you want?
I just think, like Antonio was saying, it's a good thing they put a date on it, but I don't think people should get it into their heads that, oh yeah, this is absolutely going to happen in June, because as much as people don't really like hearing we kind of have to just see how the thing progresses or the situation progresses, you almost have to, because going back to that extended playoff, there's been reports that this virus could even come back in the fall and winter months and be twice as worse. So if you have the extended playoffs in November, possibly going into December, that could be a disaster waiting to happen, because again, if somebody gets test positive on the team, that could just be game over by then. And if it's in the playoffs, you don't want high profile games going down the tubes because of a second spread. But yeah, it's just it's going to be tough, but I agree with Antonio. At this point, there really shouldn't even be any sports this year. It's just, I think it would just be better safe than sorry.
Yeah, and I have a few, I don't want to call them final points, because I think we can still expand on a couple of them. But I actually think the teams that benefit from all this are the teams, to put a positive note on it, are teams like the Pirates. the worst teams get to see their ball clubs when there's nothing else to watch. There's nothing else to do. We're not allowed to go anywhere. But if you're a team like the Yankees, the Phillies, the big teams we've been talking about, where this is your window, I don't think you'd want a World Series ring with an asterisk on it. And that, I think it kind of leads into my second point as far as windows is I think a lot of why they're doing this is because it'd be a lot harder to figure out service time. It'd be a lot harder to figure out salaries, signing bonuses, option years. If you skip a whole year, you have to figure out, I signed a Mike Trout through they signed him until he was like 50, but you're getting an extra year of that contract where he's a year older. And you already consider that for every contract. Maybe you didn't want a guy when he was 31. You only wanted him until he was 30, and you're pushing that a year. So I think they're forcing this because they want to make these service years for these guys, which if I'm a Yankees fan, I'm bummed. This was my year to win the World Series, and there's going to be a big asterisk on it where everyone just thinks, well, it was 100 games, who knows? And then my final point that we could expand on maybe a little bit is where I do think these divisions do is I think the only lasting thing we're going to see, I think this is the end of the pitchers hitting. I think we'll forever have a DH. I've been a ban the DH guy for a while. As of late, I'm kind of coming around on it. I love double switches. I love the strategy behind it. But with very few pitchers hitting well, typically they're pitching around the 8th hitter to get to the 9th hitter, which is the pitcher. And then you have 2 at-bats in a row that are kind of lousy. The 8th hitter's not getting anything to hit, and then the 9th hitter's getting out or butting the guy over. And I love the strategy. I've always been a ban the DH guy because of it. But baseball is getting slower and slower, and I think a way to speed it up would be to just institute the DH across the leagues. And I think with us having divisions that cross the leagues, we'll see that moving forward. I think that'll be a lasting consequence of this.
Shalene, are we pro DH or ban DH? Former ban DHer says, let's change it up.
You know what? I'm going to agree. I say ban, you know what? No, I think we should just have DHs everywhere, honestly, because going off of like what Antonio was saying, besides the whole you might have a few lousy at-bats in the bottom of the lineup, you also have to think of possibly injuries too. Like, say if you're Max Scherzer and you're running around first base, if you get a hit, you slip, you tear something, strain something, break something, you just lost your ace for God knows how long. Like, the best example I can at least remember right off the top of my head, it wasn't in an actual game, but it was in spring training when Burnett first signed with us, and he took the bunt and he broke his orbital bone, and we didn't have him for how long. That could have been a disaster, more of a disaster than it really was. But yeah, I just think a lot of teams rely on their pitching and putting them into situations where they could easily hurt themselves, and taking your best pitchers out of the lineup when, say, going into August, September, when you really need them to win those games. And then if they get hurt, they're not there for the playoffs. It could be a huge problem for certain teams who that's their number one reliance is on pitching. So yeah, I'd say we need to just sit the pitchers in the dugout until they go to pitch.
Yeah, and we're seeing the MLB go to lengths such as talking about moving the mound back, putting a guy on second base in extra innings, pitch clocks, things that just would ultimately fuel more offense. And I think an easy rule that doesn't change the game too much that you could implement is just putting that DH across both leagues. And I'm a big don't change anything about baseball guy, but baseball doesn't need to get or keep me. They're going to keep me no matter what they do. What they need to do is go out and grab new people. And I understand that. So if you're, like I said, I'm a don't change anything, but if you have to change something, I think putting the DH across both leagues moving forward would be a good first step, and it'd be a lot better than some of the other terrible rules they're talking about putting in. So we're going back to that good is a relative term, and I'd say relative to the other changes, the DH would be a good one.
Do you think that purely hypothesizing here, obviously there's going to be no fans in the stands in 2020, arguably, but, to get people to watch sports, they want it to be exciting. I mean, honestly, right now, anybody will watch anything. I see people tweeting about the South Korean League, like crazy right now, and I have no idea what they're talking about. But, people do have that argument that baseball's too slow. There's not much happening. They're taking a hit and then you're waiting 30 seconds for the next play to start. Do you think that implementing these changes and all of those rules that you just mentioned could help baseball get more viewers, especially in a crucial time like this?
Oh, I think so, because it's been kind of on a downward, not spiral, but it's just been kind of going downhill over the years, whereas hockey's been kind of on the rise. Not everywhere, but obviously in certain places, but it's way more high energy. And for personal experience, I love baseball, but hockey's always going to be my sport. And because it's just always been high action, high intensity. And I don't know if you guys have been watching any of the, on AT&T Sportsnet, they always have the playbacks of all the older games, hockey games, playoffs, whatever. It's sad that it's I'm just more inclined to go towards the hockey ones than the baseball, because it's just granted, I love watching the 79 because I've always wanted to watch the 79 World Series, so that was entertaining. But yeah, they need to do something, because like Antonio said, you have those diehard baseball fans that they're not going anywhere. You need to get those people that are just casual fans, and you need to find a way to get them hooked and keep them for as long as any other baseball fans that have been around for a while. You need to keep those people, because if you lose the casual fan, you're going to be losing a good portion of your revenues and everything, because yeah, there's a bunch of diehard baseball fans, but they're not going to always keep a league afloat. You can't just rely on a select few. You have to try to go for as many people as you can.
Yeah, and what's funny is you mentioned watching those old games and switching on to the hockey games. Right before we started recording this, I was watching an old baseball game. Well, not the Pirates. It was Game 4, ALCS, Red Sox-Yankees. And I knew that in this inning, Ortiz has a huge hit to really open it up. And at the time, I was a Red Sox – I was still a Pirates fan, but the Red Sox hadn't won anything then. I kind of liked their story, how they were cursed, couldn't win. I was definitely rooting for them over the Yankees. So I knew what was coming. I knew Ortiz was about to have a big hit to open it up. And that's when I realized watching baseball is very slow, because I'm on the edge of my seat waiting for this Ortiz at bat to come up. And the pitching coach goes out to the mound twice. And I'm thinking, just get to the Ortiz at bat. And I'm a diehard baseball fan. If I'm thinking that way, I'm turning to the person next to me while watching it and saying, wow, baseball is kind of slow. I can't imagine what people who don't like baseball or are new to baseball think. So, yeah, I think baby steps in the right direction as far as speeding up the game. We could do a whole podcast on the rules I think we should implement and the rules we shouldn't implement. But I just wanted to touch on how I think this is the time to put the DH into both leagues.
Well, I am definitely making a note of future podcast episode rules, do's, and don'ts with Antonio Wolfe. I'm not even going to say anything. I will literally just give the floor to you. That is a great idea. But guys, awesome thoughts there. I think you guys all hit every single point, and you guys all really expressed great concern about where baseball's heading, what these conferences are going to look like, and of course, if anyone agrees or disagrees with Antonio, Shalene, or I, although I don't really know what you're going to agree or disagree with me on, but maybe Rachel, shut up. We don't care about the Sounders on a Pittsburgh Sports Castle podcast. But feel free to tweet all of us. Feel free to tweet Pittsburgh Sports Castle. We're on Twitter at PGH Sports Castle. And then, guys, where can we find you on Twitter? And do you have any final thoughts on anything?
You can find me on Twitter at Shalene Hixon 21. And all my final thoughts are, I just want sports back. As a huge sports nut, this has been painful. This has been so painful. But I mean, it's nice watching all those old games, like Antonio was saying, just watching all those old games back. It brings back some good memories, but I want to hopefully make some new ones soon. So Yeah, let's just hope everyone stays safe and this ends sooner rather than later, and we can all get back to sports again.
Yeah, and you can find me on Twitter at Antonio_7793. And as far as final thoughts, this was fun. I really enjoyed talking about sports again. I have to admit, when Charrington and Shelton got hired, I was writing like crazy. I was putting out 2-3 posts a week on Pittsburgh Sports Castle. And I've tried, since this has all happened, to write. I've tried to put pen to paper. I've tried to put paragraphs together. And I don't know if it's a sadness. I don't know if it's a disinterest in the world right now. I haven't been able to do it. I have half articles saved all over my computer. It's really difficult to be a sports fan right now. So just seeing and talking about proposals like this has really brought up my spirits, and I hope it helps the listeners too, and the people that consistently read our columns, and that they really enjoy this and we get some good feedback.
Yeah, for sure. And starting this podcast was kind of a way that, I literally texted Cody the day before we did our first episode, and I said, I'm bored. We need to do something. Let's talk about the NFL draft. So it's always great to talk about sports, and can't wait to do it again. I have to make a note to our listeners that I was wrong. I will publicly admit when I am wrong. I do not have this overwhelming pride. I was so gung-ho about Andy Dalton needs to come to the Steelers, and then he got picked up by the Dallas Cowboys. And when Cody texted me that, my heart was just like, oh man, I'm going to get so much crap on Twitter for this. But you can find me on Twitter at Rachael Kriger. Exciting news, our Pittsburgh Sports Castle podcast. We are on Spotify, we are on Deezer, we are on Podcast Addict, and we are on Podchaser. Of course, we're on Spreaker. That is where we record. That is our awesome host website. Working on getting us on Apple Podcasts, working on getting us on iHeartRadio, so hopefully those will come through soon. Listeners, if you have any ideas for podcast prompts and topics, feel free to reach out to members of our team and our Pittsburgh Sports Castle Twitter to send some ideas along. Thank you for joining us. Once again, a huge thank you to all of those people on the front line, all of those essential workers out there, just really making sure that we are well equipped to handle this pandemic. And listeners, we will see you next time.